The next topic is the panel discussion on performance measures. A few states that have volunteered to come up and be a part of the panel. We have myself, we have the state of Washington, state of Idaho, and the state of Montana that we're looking forward to having participate. So if you folks who are going to be a part of this panel could come up.
All right, the way this is going to work is each of the 4 people who were voluntold that they were going to participate in this are going to give a little intro, a little bit about their state's program. So we'll start with that.
In Oregon, we've had performance measures for a long time, you know, back in the 1990s, the state developed a lot of performance measures with our legislature, kind of banging us over the head, so to speak. And we've had a pavement performance measure that's been in place for over 20 years, right? And we actually started in 2003, what happened is the legislature actually made it a part of the budget approval process. That kind of gets an agency's attention when they make performance measures and the tracking of those and how you're doing on those a part of your budgeting. In Oregon, we use a performance measure based on what we call fair or better. Roads that are rated very good, good, and fair, and the sum of those miles divided by your total miles in your system. Anyway, our fair or better numbers have been historically around anywhere from the mid-80s to almost 90% more recently. We've had a little bit of a gain over the last couple of years. Performance measures are for our state highway system. I have this slide here to just show you there's a lot of differences when we start talking about performance measures and whether we're talking about the state highway system, the NHS. What does this all mean? This slide is sort of illustrating. We now have performance measures through the new federal ones on the interstate itself. Well, that's part of the state domain. But we have in the new NHS measures, a lot of that is ours, but some of that is part of the non-state system. And in our universe has pieces of highway that are still state highway that aren't part of the NHS, so it gets very convoluted very quickly when you start talking about numbers. You're not always talking about the same set of highways. We have different thresholds and distresses. These were just differences that are quick and dirty set of similarities and differences between the two. And there's a few check marks in there that are the same, and there's a lot of differences. Asphalt roads, if they have patching in them, as long as they're smooth and they don't have a rut and they don't have a crack, they're good. And in Oregon, that is not a good road. That's at best a fair road. That's definitely a picture that illustrates we're talking about different things when we're talking about the way we do it, because we rate patching and the way Federal Highway does it, where I understand they have to use a simplified process, but you know, we end up with differences. This is a road with potholes in it. A pothole is definitely an issue in our system, and potholes aren't really a part of the federal system rating. And assuming it makes the IRI, and that it might fail there, and it might fail the rut, but there is a difference in the two. With concrete, broken slabs definitely are something that we get our attention. With the federal system, if there's not a transverse crack in that slab, then it's not a failed slab, or doesn't count to the cracking. So there's just some differences there, and we have some concrete roads with longitudinal cracking that get our attention. And again, the longitudinal crackings aren't really a part of the other one. Rutting is an issue on concrete pavement. Who would have thought? But it is in the northern states where we have stud and chain wear. And so rutting is something that we look at for all our pavement systems. And on the federal side, you know, they're not looking at that. Now, it's not an issue for somebody like me who understands it, but when we're trying to explain it to others, those are a lot of little nuances that sometimes get in the way of the conversation, particularly when the audience may not trust you. And so that's kind of the issue, if you ask me. We have 2 sets of numbers, though. We got the ODOT way, and it has a lot more red in it than the federal measures. And we have a lot more green in ours than the federal measures. What's interesting is we have a lot of yellow when we judge ourselves with our federal measures. Anyway, they're apples and oranges. The systems don't communicate the same thing. Got some concerns here. I don't want to tie up too much time, so we can go over anything through the question and answers.
Hi, I'm Gayle Padmos. I'm from Montana, and I'm a pavement management engineer. I was going to give you just kind of a brief introduction to our preservation program leading into our performance measures. We collect 22,000 lane miles a year, pavement data. Half of that is the NH and the interstate. We have 5 districts throughout the state. They all are responsible for nominating their construction-related preservation projects, and maintenance also does their own nominations, but they're reviewed at headquarters for preservation projects. We have 3 MPOs. There's no crossover in NHS ownership. That was kind of designed in the 2013 expansion, that the state would own the entirety of the NHS, so that simplified a little bit when we went into the federal measures. We have 19 urban areas. Yes, there is urban areas in Montana. We have a urban pavement preservation program that rotates. Each district gets so much money, but their urban areas kind of rotate each year. They don't get it every year. So that's kind of an introduction to our system. And then our preservation program, we have been very active in preservation since around 1999, 2000. We have a dedicated funding stream since then. We do a 2-year nomination window. And we have a pretty good toolbox, but we've come to find we're kind of leaning on the mill and fills a little more right now. So we have been actively trying to research or practice on the scrub seals. Our maintenance staff is really active on that. Fog seals, we've been trying those out to see how they work, but you got that slippery surface in the winter, so we're really careful where we're trying those out. We've been experimenting with microsurfacing, had some pretty good results, had some not so good results. And our maintenance folks are really active in the mastic. So that's kind of where we're at with our toolbox in preservation. Our performance measures, we've been actively funding our projects based on a performance measure since about 2002, and our measure is IRI, or we convert it to a RIDE index on a 100-point scale. And for us, we're slightly different than the feds. Good is anything less than a 75 RRI, and anything poor is greater than 150 RRI. And then for our targets for our TAMP, we set them, we're actually better than what we set them for 2 reasons. One was we don't manage on those same metrics. We don't have those same metrics combining inside our systems that combine rutting, IRI, and cracking to say good, fair, or poor. We have one's good, fair, or poor on each one, but not combined. Since we don't have a historical way of looking at that, we decided, 1, to set it conservative for that, and 2, we had winter last year, a winter we haven't had for a long time. We had snow in October, and we still had snow on some roads in end of April, early May. And we knew we were going to have flooding. We had some massive floods up in the northern tier that could infect some NHS routes. I think there was a little bit of the interstate affected. So we set our targets really conservatively because of that. And like I mentioned, we have worked to performance targets, but we've always managed to ride the IRI, not rutting or cracking. So that is a real quick introduction to Montana.
Good afternoon, my name's Jim Poorbaugh, and I'm not even going to pretend I have a slideshow. But I really am glad to be here today, even though I was kind of voluntold to be here. And it's exciting, and I think this is an exciting time. Quality is kind of a snooze topic, but it's really important. And at ITD, as we talk about quality, that's really become central to our message. And we can get really spun up on metrics and federal criteria and all of these things, and right, those are really exciting also. And people get lost, they lose the message. And really what we're after is, am I acting in behalf of the best interest of everyone in the state? And I can get hung up on getting certain preservation treatments to last an extra 6 months. Nobody really cares. What they care about is, I've worked my 3,000 hours this year overtime, farming potatoes, and I paid tax on that. What did you do for me? And so I think that's where our focus has been. And the federal measures created a lot of consternation. And I guess I'd like to back up and just tell you, in my role, I'm an asset management engineer for the state. I'm not a pavement design engineer. I know how to do that. That's not my focus. That's Mike's focus. And we're trying as an agency, we're struggling with how do we do this TAMP thing in transition to asset management versus just pavement, because they are discrete fields. Pavement comes underneath asset management. And so this is a real struggle for us. In my role, I collect all the data. I own my own profiler, so that's just at about $1 million. And note to self, if you own, how many folks own their own vehicles to collect? Yeah, don't let the summer interns know how much that thing's worth, because they drive like grandma all summer. So that accounts for about 15 billion data points that we collect on our roadway system. And then we produce a video log from that. It's about 5 million photos we collect every year. And so a real struggle, as we've talked about these metrics, is how do I transition? Because my predecessors, we've been doing this for about 20 years, we're awesome at collecting data. Oodles and oodles of data, servers and servers of data. We stink at translating it into meaningful information. So that's another thing that we've really struggled with, and I think the TAMP has benefited us, is that we have to take all of this rich data we have, apply it in a context, and then make sense of it. So that's something we've been struggling with, and on our journey, I think I'll share tomorrow on our state presentation a little bit about how this has occurred. But as far as the federal metrics on performance, we were very close with what we used. It was roughness, ride, and rutting, and our measurements were very, very close. So we looked at our analysis, and it was about a 2% difference. So we're like, it's de minimis. We just accepted the federal measures. Where the problem came in is all of a sudden we used one failure criteria, three-stooled method. So if one of those values was poor, it was recommended for a treatment. Where the feds now specify you have 2 failures before you need to replace it. So all of a sudden the legislature is like, woohoo, we're at 98% good pavement, no more money for you. And we're like, but the roads didn't change, it's just a number. And so we struggled, and I'd be interested to hear what you guys, struggles you've had, is to explain, look, it's the same number. The road didn't, the feds didn't like bless it and it like, woohoo, it's Lazarus, it's raised from the dead. It's still a crummy road and we still have to fix it, but 2 things haven't failed on it yet. And so that's really been a hard thing for us to communicate. And we actually transferred this duty. It goes to our HPMS coordinator. He was thrilled about it. I was very excited. But he's trying to communicate that message. And again, we've done lots and lots of marketing to say, hey, it's just a number. And can we stay with our number, which means that we show a lower quality of the overall network. But in the long term, that's a good way to approach it, because it's, if I am just scheduling work based on one failure, I'm going to catch those failures probably sooner than if I waited for 2 problems. Overall, I think our biggest struggle with the federal measurements and is really just how do we communicate that and make sure that everybody is really on the same page and you understand what it means, and that the data is translated into meaningful information, which then will transfer into correct and quality project selection and management. So that's all I had.
So I'm Dave Luhr. I'm the pavement management engineer at Washington State DOT. And so I'm going to start by a little broader look at performance measures. The FHWA has a really good website on transportation performance management. So if you go to that website sometime, you can see, and you can get on their email list, and you can see examples from different states, month to month, about different way that they're using performance measures. But there are lots of ways that we can use performance measures. A really important way is decision support, to make measurements, to make good decisions. Accountability and communication. We end up doing a lot of reports because we are accountable to a lot of people, and some want it expressed in different ways. We need performance measures to forecast, to predict what our needs are going to be in the future. And performance measures can be really useful at learning. So if we track performance measures based on different types of treatments that we use, we can learn what treatments are good and what treatments are not so good. So if we drill down a little bit into those first two categories, the first one for decision making. At WashDOT, we use it data a lot at both the project and the network level, but we take our pavement condition and we use that to forecast into the future and determine or estimate our remaining service life, and we use that to plan our programs for the future. We also use cost effectiveness, dollars per lane mile per year. We use that a lot in prioritizing our program. If we get into tight budget years, the projects that have better cost effectiveness are going to win, and the ones that are not so cost effective are going to lose. And then for accountability, there are a wide range of reports for the state legislature and the governor's office. The governor's office has a list of performance measures called Results Washington. And so there's a certain way that data is used that we have to report. Our state auditor's office comes every year to check to see what we are doing, because the data that we report affects our bond rating and how efficient we are at financing our future projects. There's the Government Accounting Standards Board, or GASB. That's every 2 years, but that's another type of report. And then MAP 21 is the key one we're going to be talking about today. It was, I should say, MAP 21 and FAST, but we basically treat our performance measures as we collect a lot of raw data, but we can package them up in different ways. And we look at MAP 21 as a report card. This is the way that the FHWA decided to design their report card. We don't use it to make decisions, but we're happy to fill out the report card and report it the way we're supposed to. So if we look specifically at these pavement performance measures, I mentioned we looked at condition. Well, condition occurs at a snapshot in time. So it gives you very limited information. It's your percent good, fair, poor, but it's only 1 point. We developed some longer range performance measures. One is remaining service life. We can look at that at a project level where we determine when we want the treatments, but we also look at it as on a network level to see if we look at all of our network in total, what's our remaining service life. Another one is deferred preservation liability. And this is the accrued cost of deferring maintenance or rehabilitation. It's like when you don't take your kids to the dentist, you're not really saving money, you're incurring a future liability. And the longer it takes before you take them to the dentist, the more it's going to cost. And so the same thing with deferred preservation liability. If we don't spend money on a treatment, we're not saving money, we're incurring a future liability, and we track that. It's really another term for backlog. And then we have asset sustainability ratio, which is a term that we borrowed from the Australians, where we look at this is at a network level, and we look at our program in a given year and see how many lane mile years of life are we putting into the network and then compare that with how many lane mile years we're consuming, and then calculate a ratio for that. All of those factors are reported on an annual basis. This is our dashboard, so to speak. This is part of our gray notebook. In blue at the bottom is the link for this on our website. This is part of our accountability website. But, and so we have performance measures that are reported all through the year on all different parts of WashDOT, from safety to bridge to congestion. But, so this is how we report our, first in the green bar, that's our good, fair, poor, and then we compare it to where we were the year before. The good, fair, poor, we look at weighted both by lane miles and by VMT, because we should be concerned about where's the majority of our traffic driving. Are they driving on good roads, or are they driving on bad roads? This is showing our percent fare or better. Right now it's at about 93%. Weighting it by lane miles and by VMT is very similar, so we don't really see a different number, but we should be concerned and we should look at it in both ways. And then the asset sustainability ratio, remaining service life, and deferred preservation liability are all there. And they indicate whether they were going up or going down, which way we want them to go, but that's reported out once a year. So that's kind of a summary of WashDOT's.
Okay, all of them were excellent presentations, and all of them were over 5 minutes. So we will have a brief discussion now of kind of what the high points were. One of the things that I want to ask, are you still collecting the data for your own state's performance measures? John, let's start with you.
Yes, we're collecting, we're doing one data collection. What the MAP 21 did is it added more data collection miles, but it basically was the same type of data collection. And what we're doing is now we're doing two different sets of processes to post-process it.
We're basically collecting the same way we'd already collected 100% both directions. The thing is, the processing changed, because we'd collected 100%, but we only analyzed 10% prior. Now we analyze 100%. So it's added a little bit of a headache of managing basically 100% more data. So yes, we're collecting the same data points. We're just analyzing it different and having to deal with more data with our HPMS folks and get that worked through the pipeline.
So yes, we're collecting the same way. We actually have modified on some of the off-system routes. We're now collecting that with our own profiler vans. So we have to collect more data. It takes more time. But the benefit to that was that we've, we could have shrugged it off and said, well, that sucks, and we don't want to do it. And we do it begrudgingly anyways. We use it as an opportunity to reach out to these cities, and a lot of them in counties, rural counties, you're the same way, they have no idea. And we show up with this van and they're like, what are you, a storm chaser? And we said, no, we can look at your road and count cracks and all this cool stuff. And so it's really been an opportunity, kind of a mixed blessing that we're meeting these folks. We had the city of Lewiston had us run some roads for them, and we helped them out. So it's helped us reach out to these communities and foster relationships. And I think at the end of the day, we look at it that it really is a good thing that we are collecting more data, and the processing time, that it just is what it is. And so it's kind of the same as it's always been. We just have more friends now. We just finished Idaho being a good corporate citizen. So they're not a state-run facility, they're an independent facility, but we do go out there and run the roads. It's an odd dynamic politically what they do, but again, we're just reaching out, helping them plan their pavements better. And the only stipulation, because I'm not doing anything for free, it's always a deal, is that when I have these crazy things, like we learned about some rejuvenators today, is I say, I'll collect your roads, but give me a section to test on, and it's easier to have them do that than me fight with my executive management. And I say, look how smart INL is, can we do what they're doing? And that seems to work out. So again, tomorrow in my state presentation, I'll talk a little bit about relationships and how those play into improving the quality of the products we produce.
In Washington, yes, we're still collecting the same data. We are processing more. We used to collect the data for the local agencies. It varies from state to state, but in Washington, 30% of our NHS that's non-interstate is locally owned. And that includes over 100 local agencies that own little pieces of the NHS. So we're now processing that data because people may not be aware, but with MAP 21, we start off just reporting IRI, but then there's a phase-in period where we report IRI plus roughness plus rutting, roughness plus rutting plus cracking at the non-interstate level. And so we'll be doing that for the local agencies where before we were not calculating that information.
How similar or dissimilar are your results for pavements in good, fair, poor between your old measures, your state measures, and the new federal measures? Similar or dissimilar?
Yeah, the new federal measures are quite a bit different. I think John mentioned in his presentation how there were quite a bit of difference. We see the same thing. The different criteria that FHWA uses is the reason for it, because there is a double fail criteria. You need to fail twice to be considered poor, and everything needs to be good to be considered good. So it tends to drive what we would normally have with a good, fair, poor. It tends to drive the good to fair, and it tends to drive the poor to fair, so you get a really large fair category. So we're happy to report that. We consider it to be a report card, but we don't use that for decision making. We have our own good, fair, poor criteria that, like I showed, what we report in our accountability notebook, we'll continue to report our old numbers and use that for decision making.
In the interest of time, ditto.
He took my comment, I said ditto too. We just managed to ride. We do our funding and everything on the IRI, and that is one thing I noticed, that the good came down, the fair went less, the poor went less, and we have a lot more fair.
I think we're all saying the same thing. I mean, what Dave said is total ditto. The numbers are different, as my slide showed, and they're orders of magnitude different. So, as long as that's part of the story, I think that's what we're after. And hopefully our customers will understand that. And we're going to continue to use our own sets of measures as well for our planning purposes and our asset management.
I'm going to carry it one more question, and that is, how are you explaining this difference to your legislators or your leadership in your agency?
Okay, in Oregon, leadership gets it, and leadership knows that we're going to have to explain that, but I don't think we really hit that explanation piece yet, and so I expect someday I'm going to get a frantic email or phone call from our governor relations office about how do we explain this. And actually putting some of these slides together that I did, I think will help. Pictures are worth 1,000 words, and I'm going to show through pictures, here are the differences and why there's a difference between what we're calling a road that's acceptable and not acceptable, and hopefully that will help the message. And I think the other part of it is the systems are different. The roads that we're summarizing are different. I think that's the easier sell, personally. I think if we can sell it on that without having to get into the nuances of what's a good road and a poor road, that's probably better.
My office doesn't communicate the message, and in working with the office that does communicate it, it's my understanding that we're going to manage to our old performance measures, but report to the feds on the new. And in 2 years, we will reevaluate where we're at in our data, and then at that time, we may change and may manage to the federal as soon as we have more information. I currently have a consultant on board trying to develop some windows in the pavement management system so that maybe we can see how these data points come together, and also maybe do some projections on those combined data points. But at this time, it's my understanding, based on that office, we are just communicating our old measures to the legislature, and I'm pretty sure that's the same message that's going to the executive staff.
Again, I'm from Idaho, and we absolutely love federal regulation up there. No, seriously, we don't. So it's been kind of a hard thing, like, even to get to a place that says, guys, we really just have to write these down and show someone. But similar to what you expressed, is that we're still going to manage to the Idaho way. The numbers didn't really change much. We do have some struggles with, the federal criteria requires that you report back at 10th mile increments, and that you have to project those 10th mile increments. And I think this is going to be a challenge going forward, because we have some of our segments are very long. And when we crank it back down and we analyze at the 10th mile level, I'm getting kind of into the weeds here, we do see a change. The long and the short of it is, we're going to still do what we do as a state with our one failure criteria. We'll report up to the feds as a report card. I think that's a great way to look at it. And what we've done is we have a dedicated, his name's Chapman, and he's brilliant. He's put a lot of like marketing material together, and he's met with the legislature. He's in DC tomorrow to present on this. He's talked to the legislature, he goes to the board, and a lot of it has just been walking them all the way from, here's the van on the street that gets the data, this is what Jim does, this is how we analyze it, here's how we report it, and walking them step by step by step through the process and say, hey, look, the sands didn't change, you're just counting the grains a little differently, and we're just going to move forward the way we've always moved forward. And it's just another, I really like your analogy of a report card.
Well, to answer your question, Judy, it's really hard to explain. Especially with our execs, because they ask questions, well, should we be changing the way we evaluate the data? And why not? And so it is difficult to go through and explain about it. The main reason that we say is that we don't think that this is a reason for changing the way we do business. We have methods, we're familiar with them. This is a report, and so we'll report it. One of the advantages of having a new system like this is that it gives every state a way to compare. So we may see more advantages in the future after 5 years or so, where we can say, well, here's how we did compared to Montana and Idaho and Oregon, all on the same scale, and we've never been able to do that before.
I'm glad Dave mentioned that, because the whole issue of we're going to keep doing our decision process using our data the way we've always done it, that holds up until these state-by-state comparisons get published, and then everybody wants to be at least in the upper half of the country. Nobody wants to be at the bottom. And so my experience in North Carolina was that when North Carolina slipped relative to our immediate 5 states around us, I was going to get a phone call, and I was going to be expected to explain what the difference was and why that occurred. So I really think this was very helpful. Anybody have any questions for anybody on the panel?
Scott Gibson with RTC Washoe County, which is the Northern Nevada, Reno, Sparks, and Washoe County. And so we interact a little bit with NDOT in terms of fulfilling the roads that are in our network that are on the NHS. And of course, we just collect PCI, and so I'm just wondering if you guys have run into your local agencies or your more urban roads and getting that data converted into a format that fits with the federal requirements.
Because I mentioned earlier that a large percentage of our NHS is local, and we've had a lot of questions from them about, because most of them use a PCI method or maybe a method that they develop themselves. And we're telling them the same thing, that there's no reason to change the way you do business. We have had people ask us, well, is there a way to convert from PCI to IRI or index, and basically we tell them no. That there really isn't any way to convert. There are researchers who try and they estimate and they guess and they extrapolate and so forth, but really they're different measures. And you're fine with your PCI, and then we encourage them to continue doing their pavement management, but this is just, because in Washington we're collecting the NHS data, they don't have to worry about collecting data and reporting to us. I think it varies from state to state, but from what I've heard, I think all of us are collecting the raw data. So we tell them not to worry about it.
A positive is, so I'm from a state, we've got like 1.2 million people in the state or something ridiculously small. The largest metropolitan area is 700,000 people, and we have 5 MPOs that we deal with, 5 or 6. And one of the benefits is I live in Boise, it's the largest city, and our Compass is the MPO. And actually, when they were aware of this and started like, oh my goodness, what do we have to do? They came to us and said, we have to do this, you're gonna help us out with it. And it's de minimis, it's like 2% of our network is owned by locals. But they've actually come back and said, hey, can we get access to your asset management system? Will you come teach us how to manage our pavements better? And so we're getting this continuity, and then we've even had discussions to say, well, maybe there's cost sharing with our asset management system, and will you cost share with us? And even Ada County is the largest county there. And they're talking to us, and I meet monthly with them about, hey, can you run this road for us? Or we're thinking, now they're actually thinking about getting their own van and using our pavement management system. So I think it's going to be a great thing as far as building continuity within states and raising the appreciation for asset management.
I feel like shame on me if I don't say something about what I've heard on the performance measures, because I was there when my previous job was actually standing up as one of the team lead for for the Transportation Performance Management Office that we stood up since 2012. And now that I move on to being the construction management team leader. But what I've heard from the panel, at least, kind of reminds me that when we first started that process of implementing MAP 21 requirement, which is to establish performance measures, we work with so many of our partners, specifically with Daniela Bremer from Washington State, and from Missouri we have Mara Campbell. So they were the champions for the state, from the state perspective. We went through a lot of public input and involvement, stakeholder involvement, tens of thousands of people that we reached. So this was just one that we came up with the measures, all the set of 20 plus measures for the whole set. On the pavement side, we got the ASHTO, committees involved in all that. So at the end of the day, this is the first time we go about actually setting a national performance measure consistently, that every state is supposed to collect the data the same way and all that. At the end of the day, I think it was it Washington State who said that we were able to compare apples to apples years down the road, and that was the idea. So the other thing is that I was actually developing storytelling at the end of the day. You have the opportunity as a state DOT to tell your story as to what you accomplished and why. And there may be some of the things that you mentioned earlier could help to tell your story. So one of the things that actually, the idea is that anybody heard of DRIP? Information rich and data poor? I think it's data rich and information poor, sorry. Data rich, information poor, DRIP. So at the end of the day, the legislature especially needs to know, you know, like if you can show them why, if you were to be given this amount of money, this is what you're going to accomplish in terms of performance measures to show them. So, but if you don't get more, this is what you're going to get. So this is a way to actually be able to explain better to your legislature and kind of make use of that opportunity to be able to tell your story. I'm sure your folks, you know, in the marketing arena could help you with that. So at the end of the day, I think another opportunity might be that when you report back to Federal Highway, there's an opportunity that, you know, you need to, since it's the first time, there is this idea of, let's see what happens. And there may be an opportunity, if you know what the issues are and what the problems that you encounter over this period of time, there's always the opportunity down the road to make adjustments to what is not working, and here's why. So I just want to say something only because it feels like if I don't, I'm kind of wanting to make you...
We were not beating up on Federal Highway.
I understand. Thank you.
For those of you who didn't know, this is Connie Yu with Federal Highway Administration. So if you would please thank our panel for their willingness to
The preceding was produced by the National Center for Pavement Preservation. More information can be found on the web at pavementpreservation.org. Additional support provided by Michigan State University.